From A&E, this is Biography.
I think it's fair to call him the father of the self-help movement that swept across America. Today, you can't turn on the television without seeing an infomercial selling a way to improve yourself. You can't enter a bookstore without passing hundreds of books dedicated to making you better. Well, this is the book that started it all. 60 years ago, Dale Carnegie wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People. Since then, 30 million copies have been sold. Carnegie called himself a common man from the Midwest with a simple philosophy for self-improvement. Enough people agreed that his book and his courses remain popular around the world. Dale Carnegie had his critics. The writer Sinclair Lewis called his methods yesing the boss and making big business right with God. But as Biography discovered, Carnegie also won a legion of disciples and ignited a revolution, built on a set of ideas that are remarkable only for being so basic.
Remember, if you want to be liked instantly, do as the puppy does. Become genuinely interested in other people and show it.
Act enthusiastic. Smile. It's the gospel according to Dale Carnegie. Simple ideas from a man who became a guru to millions.
You know, the happiness you get out of life will depend very largely upon your ability to win friends and influence people.
His principles of human relations, they're godlike almost in terms of their power if you just remember to keep things simple.
And when he put those simple principles in a book, Dale Carnegie made publishing history.
He really was a man who took a fundamental need, the need to connect, simplified it, and thereby made communication more effective for a large number of people.
It always humbles me to know how much my father affected other people's lives.
Before there was an entire industry devoted to self-improvement, there was Dale Carnegie and his promise to make the rest of us just a little bit better.
Stacy Kessler.
It's graduation night for another batch of Dale Carnegie students. They've spent 12 weeks trying to conquer the one human fear that ranks near death, public speaking. Beyond that, they've studied a set of principles intended to improve their lives.
These simple principles are things that really get you ahead in life and make you a better person.
Learn how to listen, develop those listening skills. Just to make you a better person.
There's just no end to the principles and where they can be applied.
The man who laid down those principles was born more than a century ago into a life of hard times, hard work, and failure. The Carnegies owned a tiny home in the northwest corner of Missouri. Dale's father, James Carnegie, was a farmer with a knack for cultivating very little besides bad luck. He tried growing various crops, which were often flooded by a nearby river. James Carnegie also tried his hand at raising hogs, who fell victim to cholera. There was little money and the constant threat of foreclosure. This was the world into which Dale Carnegie was born in 1888.
The farm being so poor, life being so hard, he had a huge incentive to leave as soon as he could.
Even more incentive came from his mother. Amanda Carnegie was gregarious and dynamic, a Sunday school teacher and natural leader.
There were no outlets for women with that kind of initiative and power that she had as a personality and talent and ability, except within the confines of the community. So she was greatly looked up to in the community.
Amanda was a polished speaker who preached against the evils of whiskey and even considered dancing a sin. She wanted her 2 boys to become missionaries for the Methodist Church and expected especially great things from Dale.
I think his mother was a driving force. I know she was. She saw in him that he could accomplish more than just being a farmer in Missouri. What his mother instilled in him and maybe insisted on him becoming is what drove him.
She encouraged Dale to stand up and give speeches at Sunday school and insisted he receive a proper education. Dale went to a traditional one-room schoolhouse, maintaining grades that were good enough to get him into college. At the age of 16, he enrolled at the State Teachers College in Warrensburg, Missouri. To save money, Dale lived at home and helped his father with the chores. He got up every morning at 3 o'clock to feed the hogs and milk the cows. Then, when it was time for class, he put on his one and only suit and walked.
Not having fancy clothes, not having enough money to live at college, but have to take a 3-mile walk to school when everybody else at this teacher's college could live at the campus. I think it certainly gave him a burning desire to have a very different sort of life as an adult.
But there was no obvious outlet for that burning desire. Dale dreamed of becoming a great author and joined the college literary society, although he displayed no talent as a writer or as a scholar. Dale was small, unathletic, and a non-entity on campus. He was also tired of all the hard work and deeply ashamed of being poor. During moments of despair, Dale briefly considered suicide until he discovered a talent that would change him forever. In a later movie about his life, Dale's mother gets the credit for pushing him in the right direction.
Well, I didn't make the football team, Mom.
Oh, why don't you try for the debating team? I think you could do very well. And just think of all the great men who've made their mark through skill in speaking.
Gee, Mom, do you think I could really get up and talk in front of people?
He could, and he did. Dale joined the college debating team and soon won an oratory contest. Suddenly, the poor farmer's son with the big ears was popular, voted vice president of his class. He also started teaching other students how to speak in public.
For him, it was a big coming of age, where the farm boy discovers, hey, I've got some talent here.
After his junior year, Dale decided it was time to earn a living and left college without a degree. He heard there was big money to be made in sales and landed a job with the giant Armour Meat Company. Dale was given a salary, $17 a week, and a sales territory in the Badlands of South Dakota. His job was selling meat and soap to small shopkeepers, and he had a knack for it. In one letter to his mother, Dale wrote, "I have had extra fine luck." Whether it was luck or skill, Dale managed to put away the impressive sum of $500. Armour offered him a management job, but Dale said no thanks. Instead, he felt it was time to leave the Midwest behind. Still in his early 20s, Dale had an irresistible urge to go east and seek his fortune. At the dawn of the 20th century, that same urge was felt by young men throughout the Midwest.
Oh, it was the time of America's imperial destiny. It was the high point of optimism about the future of the country. It was a time when the cities were still short of labor and there were great opportunities.
Dale Carnegie's destination, the biggest city of them all, New York. His fantasy was still to become a famous writer, but Dale decided to first try his hand at acting. He spent most of his $500 to enroll at the best acting school in New York, where one of his classmates was Edward G. Robinson. Dale landed exactly one role, a small role at that. Soon, he was just another unemployed actor in the big city, desperate for money and work. But if he couldn't act, at least he could sell. His first real job in New York was selling Packard cars and trucks. This is a typical Packard of the era, called the mother-in-law model. Presumably that's her in the back seat. The cars were luxurious, but Dale Carnegie rang up very few sales.
He said, I hated anything mechanical. I knew nothing about the insides of machines or cars or anything, and what's more, I didn't want to know, and I hated everything about it. He was just scraping along miserably.
Really despairing moments when he was selling Packard cars and trucks and not doing well at it and not enjoying it, living in a flea bag apartment in the west side of Manhattan, fighting off roaches. Pretty dismal time, and not doing what he wanted to do, which at that point was to be a writer.
Dale was selling cars by day, not selling them is closer to the truth, and writing by night. His long-standing dream of being a great novelist was still alive until he actually wrote his first book.
When he finally finished it and reread it, he realized it was a terrible novel and that he was not cut out to be a novelist, and that therefore he'd better, pick up the pieces and find something that he could do and could do well.
Now, he's 24 years of age. So I said, what was there that I enjoyed, that I really had success with? And he decided it was in debating and in public speaking.
He decided that's how he would make a living, by teaching public speaking. He offered his services as a teacher to New York University and Columbia. Both schools turned him down flat. His next stop was the YMCA in Harlem. The Y accepted Carnegie's offer to teach public speaking at night school. Like most teachers of the era, Dale stood in front of the class and gave a lecture. Until one night when he ran out of things to say.
I think in that moment of panic, what am I going to do? How am I going to teach these people? How am I going to make a living? He was struck by a great inspiration, which was to have them do the work and have them get on their feet and talk.
It was a stroke of genius, and the Dale Carnegie course took off. His classes were filled with eager students who were scared to death of public speaking. Just like at college, Carnegie was once again doing what he did best, teaching and inspiring.
Dale Carnegie was transformed in the classroom. He just knew instinctively the right thing to do and say to bring people out, and that he was charismatic. He was charismatic in the classroom, and that was what he lived for.
Anyone who's been around in those days will tell you that he just had this deep love for people, this deep caring, and you can't fake that. I think people sense that. I think that was a big part of his success. And the other thing is vision and some commitment. He had a passion for what he was doing. He loved it. He was driven by it. It was his life's work. It wasn't a business for him. It was a mission for him.
Fulfilling that mission would soon make Dale Carnegie wealthy, popular, and one of the most famous men in the country. In 1912, Dale Carnegie discovered his passion, teaching a YMCA night school course in public speaking. It was the right class at just the right time in history. Sweeping changes were transforming the America of small businesses and individual shopkeepers. There were suddenly giant enterprises turning out cars and steel. And along with the enormous companies came a new breed of businessmen, the middle manager.
These people didn't have the power of ownership to convince people what to do. They had to use some persuasion.
Carnegie felt success in business required more than just competence, that the ability to communicate was crucial. And he was available to teach the skills that could help someone in middle management rise to upper management. At the same time, New York and other cities were crowded with new arrivals, not just from Europe, but also from the American Midwest. In Dale Carnegie, they had a kindred spirit who could help them find their way in the big city.
It was a new world in the early years of the 20th century, and people were anxious about it. And Carnegie comes along with his hand out, saying, I can help you to function in this world. It's not as dangerous or as frightening as it might seem. You can get along in this world, and I can help you with that.
He did it by challenging the students to face their biggest fear head-on. They were to get up and talk, while the rest of the group offered encouragement and support.
There wasn't AA, there was no Weight Watchers, but the same group dynamics that make them, or group therapy, a powerful force to change behavior today, he stumbled on back in 1912 and realized could enable people to change their attitudes and change their behavior.
As Carnegie's classes grew in popularity, he made a change of his own, altering the spelling of his last name. His family spelled it with E-Y at the end, but Dale changed it to I-E to match the steel tycoon Andrew Carnegie, who was no relation. It turned out to be a shrewd business decision.
I think there's a significant amount of ambition involved in that name change, saying, hey, I don't care if people confuse me with Andrew Carnegie, the richest man in America. That's fine. There's really no difference between us except, he made it and I haven't quite done that yet.
He might not have been in Andrew Carnegie's league, but Dale was earning far more money than ever before. He spent it on travel and an active social life that included dating various women. Carnegie was considered quite a catch, but remained a committed bachelor. Meanwhile, he also started writing articles for magazines and even a full-length book. Dale Carnegie was gaining national attention as an expert in public speaking. His reputation impressed a college professor named Lowell Thomas, who would soon become a famous world traveler and radio personality. Thomas asked Carnegie for help on a speech, then hired him as his business manager. The two men sailed to Europe to present a series of wartime adventure films Thomas had shot in the Middle East. Their show played before capacity crowds in London. It was an adventure that gave Carnegie a chance to see more of the world, but he was anxious to return to his teaching. Back in New York, Carnegie changed the focus of his course. He noticed that as students overcame their fear of public speaking, they gained overall self-confidence. Most people weren't looking to become professional orators. Rather, they were hungry for personal skills to use in their everyday lives. So he transformed his classes to concentrate on what he called human relations. Carnegie developed various techniques, including the heckling session, where he playfully used a newspaper to symbolically bring his students out of their shells.
You saw the underlying real problem that people had, and the real desire they had was not to be a speaker as much as to have confidence, to be able to deal with other human beings in a way where they were comfortable and where they felt appreciated and could connect with people. And it was a natural evolution for him to say, this is what I really need to put my focus on. And that evolution happened fairly rapidly.
At the same time, Carnegie started compiling a list of his principles, such as don't criticize, condemn, or complain. In one of his few recorded speeches, Carnegie spoke about another principle, show enthusiasm.
The man who's enthusiastic will find the scales tipped in his favor, and a man of second-rate ability with enthusiasm will outstrip a man of first-rate ability without enthusiasm.
Carnegie admittedly borrowed many of the principles from others, including Jesus and Mohammed. He added some of his own, then offered the principles to his students as a formula for self-improvement. It was 1 part psychology, 1 part philosophy, and 10 parts common sense.
I think the major principle is showing respect for other people and giving people that dignity that every human being deserves to have.
None of the principles are unique to him. I mean, they're basic common sense. How do you get along with people? How do you motivate people? How do you motivate yourself? How do you control worry?
One of Carnegie's principles was to admit mistakes quickly. And in 1921, he made the biggest mistake of his life. During a trip to Baltimore, he met an older woman named Lolita Beaucaire, who claimed to be a French countess. She pursued him until they were finally married in 1921, when Carnegie was 36 years old. The newlyweds lived briefly in Europe, where Carnegie tried once more to write a novel. It was a disaster. So was the marriage.
He was, sort of the classic henpecked husband. Today, I suppose the divorce would have taken place in 2 months, but then divorce was a huge, huge proposition.
They finally did divorce after 10 unhappy years. For the rest of his life, Dale Carnegie rarely mentioned his first wife. There's not a single photo of the couple together. The marriage was the one mistake Carnegie couldn't admit, one of the few times he did not follow his own principles.
It's tough for a teacher whose basis of success is getting along with people. It's awkward to have a naked failure, a marriage. It just was awful.
He said it was the worst mistake he ever made. He said, I never spent a happy moment for the 10 years they were married. He said, I was utterly miserable with this woman.
In 1931, with his disastrous marriage over, Carnegie sat down to write another book. His subject was Abe Lincoln and his disastrous marriage to Mary Todd. It was Carnegie's way of expressing his frustration. Lincoln the Unknown was another flop. But Dale Carnegie was about to make publishing history. In 1932, Dale Carnegie was 43 years old and determined to make a fresh start. With his first marriage behind him, he took time off for a trip to the Far East. In China, he witnessed poverty unlike anything he had seen before, even in the bleakest days of his Missouri childhood. Carnegie shot these home movies so he would never forget how fortunate he was to be an American. But back home, things were also bleak. The stock market crash of '29 was followed by an economic crash. Factories were shut down. Millions of Americans were out of work. But for Dale Carnegie, business was better than ever.
What he was doing was appealing to people who were trying to differentiate themselves from others with these additional skills that would protect them from being laid off.
One of Carnegie's students who had a job was Leon Shimkin, an executive at the tiny publishing firm of Simon & Schuster. Shimkin fell in love with Carnegie's class and his principles and tried to convince him to write a book. Carnegie resisted, but then started putting together some notes.
Well, one reason that he wrote it was that there was such a dearth of material around to teach people how to get along with each other, which he found amazing. This is the most important skill that you could learn, and yet we didn't have any manuals for it.
This is Dale Carnegie's actual first draft for his new book. He was going to call one section, 5 Ways to Make People Like You. Then thought of another way and changed it to 6. Carnegie finished his book late in 1936, then came up with a title, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
How to win friends and influence people. I mean, there you have it all. Winning friends, and then the power to influence. So it was a brilliant title.
Carnegie filled the book with his common sense advice and principles, which he later talked about on radio.
You can win more friends in 2 months by becoming genuinely interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. A good smile has the same effect as a puppy's tail. When a puppy wags his tail, he says, I'm glad to see you. And a smile says the same thing. Be sincere. You'll just be wasting your time if you pretend to be interested in other people in order to get something out of them.
And he added homespun anecdotes about the country's leading tycoons, such as Henry Ford. Carnegie tried to explain just what made some people stand apart from the crowd.
He was the first person to say to everybody, I've gone out and learned all the secrets I could from those people who are rich and famous, and you can do it too. Not only can you do it, it's not that hard to do it, and you can be a success too. And everybody would like to hear that story.
The value of the book, the reason the book went so crazy, I think, is he was a great storyteller. And throughout human history, man has learned best by stories, man and woman. And I think he was really good at that. He took those complex ideas, made them simple by phrasing them simple, by putting them in common sense, and putting them in a series of stories that tended to inspire people to apply what they learned.
Simon & Schuster had modest expectations. They printed just 5,000 copies. Then Leon Shimkin came up with an idea. They would sell the book to graduates of Dale Carnegie's seminars.
People who had experienced the course, the book was a great vehicle for them to share with friends and colleagues and say, wow, you know the course I told you about that I was so excited about that I said did such great things for me? Well, here, you can read about it.
And everyone did want to read about it. How to Win Friends and Influence People sold 5,000 copies, all right. 5,000 copies a day.
It was a publishing phenomenon. It was as if the publisher had offered the public an article of faith, and suddenly everyone had to read it. Everyone had to own it.
It was an incredible explosion instantly, and it basically never stopped. It was a huge explosion. It stayed in hardcover and as a bestseller for years.
The book moved right to the top of the bestseller list and remained on the list for 10 years. Dale Carnegie had struck just the right chord among ordinary working men and women. But if How to Win Friends was the best-loved book in America, it was also the most hated by reviewers. Most of them ignored Carnegie's principle of don't criticize. The writer James Thurber wrote an acidic review. It was one of many. The book was called manipulative and simplistic, just like its author and its readers.
The sophisticated people looked down their noses at it. I don't know whether they even read it or not, but they implied that only morons would read it in the first place. But somehow the attitude didn't spread to the public at large, the book-buying public. And they were the ones who bought the book and gave it its popularity, and it kept on selling.
Not just in the United States. The book was translated into more than 30 languages and became a bestseller around the world. Dale Carnegie and his book were the subject of cartoons and lampoons. The phrase, how to win friends and influence people, became part of the English language. Another author even wrote a full-length parody called How to Lose Friends and Alienate People. One of its chapters, How to Make People Dislike You Instantly. Dale Carnegie claimed to be the most surprised man in the world. He was famous and as rich as some of the people he wrote about, although the sudden wealth apparently made him uncomfortable.
The first royalty check was for an astounding $90,000, equivalent to almost $1 million today. And he just left it on his desk for a few days until his secretary prodded him and said, are you going to deposit this? I think it was an ambivalence about this money.
There was much more money to come. Carnegie had a syndicated column that appeared in more than 70 newspapers, and his own radio program heard throughout the country. Each week, Carnegie cheerfully dispensed his blueprint for success.
Hello, everybody. You know the happiness you get out of life, and to a large extent the size of your income, will depend very largely upon your ability to win friends and influence people. Become genuinely and actively interested in other people and show it.
Even after he shot to fame, Carnegie continued to live in the same modest house in Queens and took the subway into Manhattan.
When I would go with him on walks, he knew the policeman, he knew what his name was, every person that he met in the park that were walking. He would say hello to them, he'd call them by name. He just practiced all the principles.
One of those principles is express honest, sincere appreciation. So Carnegie made sure to thank his mother. I am very grateful for all you did for me as a child. Carnegie also took every opportunity to visit his parents back home in Missouri. The farmer's son had made it in the big time, not as a missionary for the church, but as a missionary to millions of readers. At the age of 50, he was one of the most famous men in the country and one of the most eligible bachelors. That was about to change. In 1937, Dale Carnegie was a best-selling author and a genuine star. He could fill a giant concert hall with people eager to hear his wisdom. He wasn't actually a powerful orator, but his folksy manner made him an audience favorite.
There's a deep, gnawing human hunger that is rarely gratified. The deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated.
Dale Carnegie was certainly appreciated by millions of readers around the world who kept his book on the bestseller list. As the royalties poured in, Carnegie took time for a vacation in Japan.
It's largely a pleasure trip, a matter of education and recreation. Of course, I have a daily newspaper column, and naturally I'll write some of my experiences and reactions in the column.
What do you think about the Japanese people, about their courtesy and their manners?
Well, I'll say this, they're the most courteous people I think I've ever met in my life. I think the average American could learn considerable from the Japanese when it comes to courtesy.
Of course, just a few years later, the Japanese put courtesy aside and bombed Pearl Harbor. Back home, Dale Carnegie's course was spreading across America, and he was considered the country's foremost expert on human relations. Reporters sought his opinion on just about everything, from the pursuit of happiness to the quality of public schools and the prospects for Adolf Hitler benefiting from how to win friends and influence people. Because he was so trusted, Carnegie was also in demand to endorse products.
That first year and a half after How to Win Friends was published and it took off, Dale Carnegie's life changed at that moment because he became a personality overnight, and he was on demand to speak here and to appear there. And he said it was the worst 18 months of my life because it distracted him.
One of his speaking tours took Carnegie to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he met a woman who had graduated from his course. Like him, Dorothy Vanderpool had been married and divorced. She was 24 years younger, but they hit it off instantly.
He knew so many really eligible women. He could have married anyone at that time because he was very much sought after socially, and he had traveled a good deal, and he met lovely women all the time.
But it was Dorothy he wanted. Carnegie invited her to come work for him in New York. He also invited her to be his wife. In November of 1944, Dale and Dorothy were married in Tulsa. The Carnegies immediately became a team. She took care of the business. He focused on teaching.
And he was brilliant. I remember particularly one instance where there was a lady and a woman in the class who was extremely shy. She got so wrought up she burst into tears and had to leave the room. But he made a point of talking to her at the class break in such a way that she came back and performed like a veteran.
The Carnegie reputation attracted some students who went on to later fame. Auto executive Lee Iacocca took the course, as did the legendary investor Warren Buffett and Tom Monahan, founder of Domino's Pizza. Another student was John Emery, who signed up in 1948. He was driving a truck for his father's small shipping company.
Dale Carnegie arrived at a stage of my life when I needed him on a lot of fronts. I was struggling to move forward, get out of my truck driver role, try to become a salesman, try to improve my life, if you will.
Emery eventually became CEO of Emery Air Freight. He turned it into a business with revenues of more than $1 billion. He maintains part of the credit belongs to Dale Carnegie.
It improved my ability to express myself, to feel like I was getting across to another person. I was getting an opportunity to make them feel better about themselves as well. Yeah, I'd say it definitely changed my life.
Major corporations started sending their managers to Carnegie seminars, and Dale and Dorothy set up a national network of licensed instructors. They also produced a promotional film to attract even more students.
And within 4 months, 4 small months after signing up for the Dale Carnegie course, I received a promotion. And 12 months after that, I was promoted to zone sales manager of the Burroughs Corporation.
There is very little film of Dale Carnegie actually teaching his course, but in 1947 he did appear in a comedy called Jiggs and Maggie in Society.
May I give you one little bit of advice, free? When you're talking to somebody, why not let the other person finish what he's saying?
I know. I do it all the time.
Well, maybe you ought to take the course instead of Mr. Jiggs.
Mr. Carnegie, I didn't come here to be insulted. And it's for that...
Dale Carnegie, the frustrated actor, had finally landed a major part, playing Dale Carnegie.
Temper, temper, temper.
The producer of that film said to Dale Carnegie, "You're the best actor I have. You take the least amount of direction and you do exactly what you're supposed to do." And Dale Carnegie said, "That's because I'm just playing myself. I'm not acting. That is me. That's what I do."
I'll see you at 10 in the morning, Mr. Jiggs. We'll be there.
Yes, Mr. Carnegie. You might have made a few friends, but you didn't influence any people here tonight.
At the time of his movie debut, Dale Carnegie was 59 years old. He was about to land another major role as a father. In the years after World War II, Dale Carnegie was a wealthy man. He wrote another self-help book called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. Once again, the reviews were less than smashing. One critic called it choked with formula and suggested readers just throw it in the ash can. Still, the book reached number 2 on the bestseller list and went on to sell in the millions. The rich and famous author spent most of his time at home in Queens. Dale and Dorothy totally avoided the social whirl of Manhattan.
He said to me that sometimes he turned down invitations to parties because people expected him to be charismatic. And he said, "And I'm just a plain, simple farm boy from Missouri." And he was that, and he was very proud of that. So he didn't try to be what he wasn't.
Carnegie even bought a large farm near his boyhood home in northwest Missouri. He left the farming to others, except when he was hamming it up for the camera. Then in 1951, Dorothy gave birth to a baby daughter, Donna Dale. Carnegie was 63 years old and a father for the first time.
I used to be so embarrassed because you'd think nobody had ever had a baby before in the history of man. He says, "Do you realize that there is a baby in this house?" You know, as though there was an elephant in the house, and it was that rare to have a baby in the house.
I remember the walks in the woods and finding turtles. I remember helping him weed. And my father was missing one of his fingers that had been lost. Half of it had been lost in a childhood accident. And one of my favorite requests was to ask him to wiggle that finger. It was always a great joy, that and to wiggle his ears, because he had large ears.
After Donna's arrival, there were a few precious years of enchantment. Dale and Dorothy had a thriving business and a thriving marriage. But at about the same time, Dale started to grow frail. Even worse, the man who made it a point to remember names suddenly became forgetful.
He left his very expensive coat he had on a train at one time when he got off, and we had to run that down, and he began to lose things that way. I don't think they even had a name for it then, and it was generally thought to be premature senility.
In fact, Dale Carnegie had Alzheimer's disease. He could be lucid one moment, disoriented the next. At the time, doctors wrote it off to hardening of the arteries. In the summer of 1955, Dale returned one final time to his beloved state of Missouri, where he was awarded an honorary degree from his old college in Warrensburg. Just 3 months later, Dale Carnegie died at the age of 66. The official cause of death was listed as uremia, a disease of the blood. There was a ceremony in New York, but for his final resting place, Dale Carnegie had chosen the place he was born, the farm country of northwest Missouri.
When it was time to be buried, that was going back home. I mean, he was always that Midwestern boy in the big city, and a little bit lost there.
It was Dale Carnegie's wish that even in death, that it not be blown out of proportion. You'll notice on his gravestone it just says, Dale Carnegie, 1888, 1955. That's what he wanted. He said, I came into this world as a plain person, and I want to go out that way.
Dale Carnegie was eulogized as a man who symbolized the American dream, the idea that all people can make themselves better, whether in business or in life.
He really was a man who took a fundamental need of American society, and I think of humanity, the need to connect, the need to be able to influence others with integrity and with respect, simplified it, and provided it in a format that was entertaining enough that he got a large percentage of the population to apply what he learned. So how do you categorize that? I'd say an outstanding American who was a pioneer and revolutionary in his approach of simplifying what most people made overly complex.
Long after Dale Carnegie's death, How to Win Friends continues to sell 200,000 copies a year.
The fact that that book is still selling like it sells 60 years later is an achievement matched by no other self-help writer, ever. What that means is that inside that book, there is something that is given to people that is useful. Because that book today is selling by word of mouth. And word of mouth only comes from a book that is satisfying that prior consumer who read it.
I've read some of the books out today, and I see all of these things that were said by him in his books many, many years ago. Today there's much more on the market, much more competition, if you want to put it that way. But it's, how much more can you add to human nature?
There was the Duke of York. He had 10,000 men. He marched them up the hill and marched them down again.
After his death, Dale Carnegie Training became more popular than ever. Dorothy expanded the business into 70 other countries. From the time Dale Carnegie started teaching night school in 1912, more than 4 million people have taken his course, and his simple principles still resonate among young men and women who weren't yet born when he died in 1955.
Tonight in New York City or San Francisco or Tel Aviv, there will be people in a Dale Carnegie course struggling with their own concerns, their own fears, their own goals, ambitions, and that course will help them to make a little progress towards what's important for themselves.
In a way, he's a genius of common sense. That's why he's still read today. That's why he still has fans today. That's why people still take all of those Dale Carnegie courses today. He never really goes out of style.
I know how deeply my father affected my life, but it always humbles me to know how much he affected other people's lives. He still is a part of our culture, and people are still benefiting from the legacy that he left.
Dale Carnegie's ideas have been integrated into a popular piece of computer software. It's a long, long way from night school at the Harlem YMCA. But whatever the format, his principles haven't changed at all. He was certain a few simple ideas would work for anyone, just as they worked for him.
He believed in everything that he said. I remember in the mornings when my grandmother would come into the room, he would raise his orange juice glass and toast to her and say, "Good morning, Victoria," have a wonderful smile on his face. And that was what he was like. He wasn't putting it on or just doing it when he was in front of a group. This was how he lived every day of his life.
Dale Carnegie liked to call himself an average man, but he was filled with ambition and blessed with talent, including a unique understanding of human nature. It lifted him from a life of drudgery on the farm, then enabled him to lift others. While he was alive, Dale Carnegie won friends. To this day, he continues to influence people around the world.
Remember, if you want to be liked instantly, do as the puppy does. become genuinely interested in other people, and show it.
The company Dale Carnegie founded remains a family business run by his widow, son-in-law, a handful of relatives. Profits aren't revealed, but it seems little question that the business is thriving. Each year, the Dale Carnegie course attracts 130,000 students throughout the world. Sometime around the turn of the century, the company will reach a remarkable milestone, the 5 millionth graduate, since Dale Carnegie started winning friends back in 1912.